I'm sure you can all hear me. I believe so. Can everyone hear me in the back? Alrighty. Good morning. As a vice chair of the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra Board, and as chairman of the board of the Cincinnati Museum Center, I was asked to bring you official greetings and open this joint meeting of the two organizations which utilize two iconic historical buildings as centers of art and culture. Remarkable progress has been achieved by the Cultural Facilities Task Force. Our working together has achieved much more than we ever could have done separately, even dreamed of doing separately. Today we hear most of the findings of the task force. This information is confidential. It should not be shared with anyone. The information becoming public by us jeopardizes our dream of getting these buildings restored and advancing our organizations. So please ask questions today, but do not discuss any of this after today. We can't risk this wonderful opportunity. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Bob McDonald, who has been an amazing leader of this project. Amazing. He has worked very hard on this project, and as you will see, the accomplishments over the last 7 months are incredible, astronomical. I cannot say enough about it. The chair of the Cultural Facilities Task Force, Robert Bob McDonald.
Thank you. Thanks to Francie and thanks to Otto Buddig for their leadership of the MHRC and the CMC boards. I also want to thank the Museum Center for this great venue, great lunch. I want to thank the Symphony, the Opera, the Ballet, the May Festival, the Society for the Prevention of Music Hall, and the Cincinnati Arts Association for their trust and support of this task force. I want to talk about what I'm going to tell you. I spent some time in the United States Army, and we typically tell you what we're going to tell you, then we tell you what we told you. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you, and then I'm also going to tell you what I'm not going to tell you. I'll spend time answering whatever questions that you'd like. We are going to tell you the task force purpose and the process that we followed. I'm going to give a summary of the proposed funding structure. I'm going to review the private fundraising progress to date. And I say to date because we're going to have a little collection at the door as you file out. Please feel free to put whatever check you would like in that bag. I'm going to tell you the next steps in the process, and that's very important because we're going to ask for your help. What we're not going to tell is we're not going to go through a detailed explanation of all the engineering drawings and all the plans and all of the rooms and all the things that will be done. There will be separate presentations by 3CDC, my partner in crime, Steve Leeper, and his team, and CMC, with all the resident organizations of Music Hall to go through those plans, but that will be in a subsequent time. And I'm also not going to share detailed numbers today. What we found is anytime a number gets out, it's like the number turns into concrete and it can never change. So we're better off just not dealing with numbers. People make up their own. But on June 23rd, we'll come forward with the exact numbers. As Francie said, I'd like to ask for your confidentiality of this material. The media is very, very interested in what we've been doing. You saw that in the Inquirer story the other day, and they will ask you questions, and please just direct them to Elizabeth. Elizabeth is here. There's Elizabeth. Elizabeth Pierce. Just direct everybody to Elizabeth Pierce. She's playing the front for the media. Today, Commissioner Chris Monsell was on 700 WLW, just as you were coming into this room. He claims we don't have a plan. He claims we haven't deeply reviewed what needs to be done. And this is just plain wrong. It is so wrong, I can tell you I've met with him twice, one time in my home. I invited him into my home. I went through the detailed plans. I have a notebook about this thick. I went through the detailed plans and I said, would you like a copy? And he said, no, I can't do that because then it becomes part of the public record. Thousands of volunteers, and I will cover all of the task force members who have been working on this, but thousands of volunteers and expert hours have led to this presentation I'm going to share with you. And to demean the volunteer effort that these people have put forward, in my opinion, is not appropriate. We're going to present a fully vetted, viable plan at the hearing on June 23rd at 11 a.m. But we need your voices to be there. If you can be there physically, that's terrific. If you can be there in voice, that's terrific. We need the county commissioners to vote on this plan and to vote positively, or all of the effort that's been put together to get to this moment in time will be for naught. We need to invite others to be there, other concerned community citizens, to provide their vocal support. Now is the time. As I go through this presentation, you'll see that we've raised quite a bit of private philanthropy, over $34 million. All of that money is contingent on us making this happen. In other words, if we don't make this happen, if we don't make this vote happen, that $34 million goes away. It's not $34 million these two institutions will get. So we simply have to make it happen at this unique moment in time. So, here we go. By the way, if you have any questions or comments, just let me know, and I'll address them as we go rather than waiting to the end. A little background. As you know, our two iconic buildings are in jeopardy. As we were doing this study, we have deteriorating structures, and we also have inflation costs that we're looking at. On average here in the Museum Center, it's about $6-7 million a year in inflation and deterioration. Music Hall is a lower number because the building's in better shape, but say we're somewhere south of $10 million a year destruction that occurs every year that we wait. We've been kicking this can down a very long road for a very long time. Both buildings are struggling for solution. Frankly, when on December 20th, when I was called into a room at the Quinn City Club, not knowing what I was going to be asked to do, the civic leaders in that room asked me to do this, and I said, well, why do I need to do this? Why do I need to form a task force? Isn't this what we elect people to do? Was that a naive question? That's my thought on government. What we tried to do is collaborate, is to create, and Francie said it, I mean, bringing everybody together, creating a task force that represents the community, and collaborate in a way where we can get things done. And that's what we're trying to do. The task force charge, it was December 20th that we started. Immediately we hired an engineering firm and an architecture firm. We spent our holidays crawling all over these two buildings, understanding what had been done, what needs to be done. This process was called for by the Hamilton County Tax Levy Review Committee in their response to Museum Center's request to continue the operating levy. They said get a broad group of community leaders. Thank goodness for Tim Maloney and the Hale Foundation and Kathy at the Greater Cincinnati Foundation. They funded our effort, which is very, very generous of them. I was asked to be the chair, and then I was asked to please create a broad community task force. These are the names of the people who have generously volunteered their time, and I want to point out a couple of things. As we met with the county commissioners, we shared this list of names, and we gave each county commissioner the chance to request other people being put on the task force. Todd Portune suggested 3 people. We immediately called them, requested them on the task force. So we're trying to meet the need of having a really broad coalition across the community. Second point is you'll find a lot of leaders in the community on this list, business leaders, civic leaders, cultural leaders. Third point, you'll find a lot of technical experts. When I talked to my friend Father Michael Graham and I asked Mike for some help, he said, I'd love to be on the task force, but I'll tell you who's better than I am, and that's Bob Sheeran, who runs the facilities and all the engineering at Xavier. When I asked John Barrett at Western Southern, John said, I want to help, but you really need Mario San Marco, who built the tallest building in Cincinnati. So we have Wick Act, who's one of the most noted architects in the city. So we've got the engineering and technical resources that we need to make this happen. Also, I happen to be a certified professional engineer as well. Not a professional engineer in training, as they call it. The process. We reviewed the Music Hall and Union Terminal long-term plans, and we worked to value engineer those, meaning we tried to understand what the scope was and how much of that scope was really necessary so that we could get the total amount of money required to get this done down as possible, but not giving up a scope that we all really wanted. We reviewed several alternatives for Museum Center because obviously this is the structure that is deteriorating the quickest. First, we looked at what would it cost to renovate Union Terminal. Second, what would it cost to build a brand new museum center? And we used, for our study, the parking lot. What if we build it in the parking lot? Third, we were asked by a leader in the community to look at what if we relocated to a building in their neighborhood. So we actually studied the relocation to a site in the city, and we did all of the architectural and engineering work to get that done. And then we were asked to provide a viable public and private funding strategy. The engineering was done by Langen Engineering, GBBN were our architects, and Turner and Messer were the 2 construction management companies that participated with us. And they all did just an outstanding job. In fact, Turner and Messer actually worked together. They integrated their work. And it's the first time I've seen 2 construction management firms work together on behalf of a community. We were able to take about $15 million out of the costs through our value engineering work. We looked at building a new building, but that was over $300 million, so that didn't make sense for the museum center. We also looked at relocating to this existing building, and that was $260 million, which didn't make sense. So as you can guess, for Union Terminal, the cost of renovation is less than those 2 numbers. So our recommendation is to renovate Union Terminal, leave the museums here, but create a new museum experience so when you come here after renovation, you'll think that you got your money's worth as a taxpayer. One example of that is the HVAC systems here in the Museum Center are outdated and need to be replaced. Those HVAC systems occupy space in the building that could be used for displays. So as we relocate those HVAC systems, we're going to move them into space that can't be used for displays. We're going to zone those systems to reduce operating costs. Right now, the HVAC systems in this building are not zoned properly, meaning you have the same temperature, the same humidity in different zones, even though those zones are used for different purposes. Those HVAC systems were put in when this was a shopping mall, not when it was going to be a museum center. So what we're going to do is move those HVAC systems, and as we move them, we will replace them with brand new science exhibits. And we know from the work that Doug and the Museum Center team have done that science exhibits are the most attractive to bring people into museums today. So that's the kind of work we did, both in Music Hall and here in the Museum Center. Obviously, Steve Leeper and 3CDC have been great partners, and Steve and his people, Adam, have all done a terrific job in their work with Music Hall. We had a public funding committee that looked at options, sales tax increase, property tax increase, historic tax credits, state and local fundraising sources. That was led by Murray Sinclair, who's here today. He and his firm have done tremendous work in helping us figure that out. The private fundraising committee was led by Tim Maloney, and Tim also led with the largest gift from the Hale Foundation U.S. Bank of $10 million. And Tim and Scott and I have all been working on raising private funds to try to offset the ask of the public. Every effort has been made to find all kinds of sources of revenue, as well as to lower operating costs moving forward. Here are our recommendations. Our recommendation is to put in place a limited-term sales tax increase that would exclusively be used for Music Hall and Union Terminal. And that exclusive use is important. In the focus group research we've done, citizens are telling us they want these buildings repaired forever, and they want the money that they're willing to give to it to be used only for that purpose. They don't want any monkey business with that money. We heard them. Voters prefer a sales tax increase. And the reason for that is a property tax increase would be paid for only by Hamilton County inhabitants. A sales tax increase is paid for 44% by people who are not residents of the county. And those are the people who come here to use these facilities. So it's a much more direct charge by the users of the facilities. Also, as we looked at the sales tax for Hamilton County, it's in the lower tertile of other counties in the state. And even with this increase, as you can see here, we'd be no higher than 52 out of 88 counties. So we would still be in the median of counties within the state. A property tax increase, by the way it works, has to last a relatively long period of time. A sales tax increase, you can get in on the increase, get it over with quickly, and get out. And because of that ability to limit the time, that saves about $135 million in interest expense. So it seemed to us that a sales tax increase was just the right thing to do. The other thing that we would do is we would obviate the need for the museum center operating tax. The way we would do that is by reducing the operating cost. In other words, the incandescent lights would go to LED lights. We would find ways of getting new revenue, for example, the science exhibits, and we would work hard on during the construction, ways of obviating the need for that levy. That levy is about $3 million a year, and this would, in essence, reduce the property taxes that Hamilton County citizens are already paying through that levy. We're looking at historic tax credits of $45 million, and I have to tell you, that's a lot of work to get those, but we've got a great team working on it. The city of Cincinnati has offered $10 million for a music hall. We're going to work with the mayor to see if we can also get $10 million for museum center. If you'd like to help influence the city government on that, that would be helpful. And Governor Kasich, John has gave us actually more than we expected in $10 million for both facilities. This is a list of the confirmed private support that we've gotten. I was at a meeting speaking about this, and as I was speaking, somebody raised their hand. Actually, it was Harry raised his hand, and Harry said, Bob, your chart's wrong. You only have $1 million down there. I am right now giving you another $1 million. So if anybody would like to do that, please feel free to raise their hand, but good on Harry. He's terrific. We've got $5 million from Procter & Gamble. This is the largest gift Procter & Gamble's ever given to a capital campaign. $5 million from Cintas and the Farmer Family Foundation. $5 From Terry Lundgren at Macy's, $1 million. So please do not think that New York is Macy's headquarters. $1 million from Rodney McMullen and Kroger. And you can see the other gifts from individuals and foundations. Another great story. We got the word from Rodney McMullen that Kroger was going to give $1 million, and Joe Pickler happened to be copied on that note. Joe added to that email and wrote me back, said, no, Susan and I want to give $1 million. So there's just a momentum developing which is going to reduce the amount that we need to ask the public to give. So this results in, we believe we can get $40 million, but obviously we're going to need your help and the help of other citizens in the city to close that $6 million gap. We've done a lot of research to prepare. We wanted to make sure that once we come forward with a public proposal, that the citizens of the city and the county will vote in favor of it. And some early research says that roughly 60% of people want these two buildings to be preserved. And as a result of that, we worked with Landor, one of the ad agencies that Procter & Gamble uses, and Mabe Rodriguez, one of the vice presidents from Procter & Gamble, on loan to the Museum Center, has done this work to come up with a marketing campaign that we could use moving forward. The marketing campaign reflects the iconic nature of these buildings. 100% of people asked knew that the silhouette of Union Terminal was Union Terminal. 76% of people knew that the silhouette of Music Hall was Music Hall. Now, if we filled the silhouette in with the picture, the Music Hall number goes to 100%. That's pretty phenomenal, particularly when you compare it with Mickey Mouse at 100%. Our Fountain Square fountain, the Genius of Water, only 72%. Sorry. Some people thought it was Rio de Janeiro and the statue of Christ there. The Sydney Opera House, I'm sorry. Even those of you who love opera, you must not have known this was a Sydney Opera House. Somebody told me it's where Olivia Newton-John performs. And I think, I may be wrong on this, but I think the reason the Eiffel Tower did so poorly at 80% is the other 20% of people said it was Kings Island. So my point is, we are advantaged. We've got two iconic structures that every Cincinnatian, every Hamilton County resident knows what they are. And they know they're important to the community. And what we have to do is get them to tell their stories. And so what we're going to do is we're going to ask the two buildings, those two icons behind you on the table, we're going to ask those icons to ask us to speak for them, because they can't speak. And so this Speak For Us is going to serve as our call to action to get citizens involved in this campaign, push the hearing across so the county commissioners decide to put it on the ballot, and then eventually have a positive vote in November. Next steps and timeline. We've got to continue to get to that $40 million number. It's important that we get the public ask down as low as we possibly can, because every county commissioner, every opponent will say, my magic number is X. And we need to make sure that we are below that magic number or near that magic number, or prove why that magic number may not be a magic number. And the way to do that is to show broad financial support, private support, company support from the residents. Secondly, we're going to finalize all of our assumptions, all of our legal work, state tax credit work, historic tax credit work. We're going to have individual meetings with the county commissioners and the mayor. As I said, I've already met with every one of them twice, met with the mayor once. And then, of course, June 23rd at 11 a.m. Is the big meeting, the county commissioner meeting. We'll get back to you on where that will be. We're hoping that we have so many people that we have to ask your permission to hold it in Music Hall. That would be a really good sign. We could put the county commissioners up on the stage. And if the Phantom's available, we may ask him if he can work that day for us. Just joking. July 9th, public hearings, July 16th, July 30th. These dates could move around. We understand that Commissioner Monsell's got a vacation during this period of time, so those dates may move. And then August 6th is actually the filing deadline. So August 6th, we will know whether or not the county commissioners vote to put this on the ballot. Thank you for your support for these important institutions in our community. Thank you for your support for these two iconic buildings. And I'd be happy to answer any questions. We have lots of experts in the room, too, who can help me. Yes, please. Can you all hear me? On the private contributions, how are you going to do it? How are you going to... That's never happened to me before. None of my Ranger units would say that. On the private contributions, how are you going to handle that? We've been working with Kathy Merchant at the Greater Cincinnati Foundation of being an organization that can collect money and flow money for us. If people designate which of the two buildings they want to help, we'll direct it to that specific building. But that's the way we're going to do it. Do you have another?
How are you going to divide who approaches whom?
Oh, got it. Scott Provancher and Tim Maloney are the committee chairs leading that effort. There's quite an where's Scott? I saw him a few minutes ago. He's got quite an expansive spreadsheet. Do you want to talk about that?
I didn't hear the question, I'm sorry.
How are we going to make sure we don't go to the same people more than once?
So the way we've worked this with the task force, I'm Scott Provancher, and I might pull Tim Maloney up too to talk as well. But kind of how we came to the process of developing the private fundraising strategy is we're all looking at the strategy and asking the question, how much do we think we could raise for these two buildings as we were trying to fill out the broader funding structure. And ultimately we came to the conclusion that said, well, I think the best way to figure that out is let's just go start asking people and talking about the process and beginning the conversation around would these two buildings together be an interesting prospect for someone to invest in, particularly Procter & Gamble, the Hale Foundation, and some of the other larger corporate and philanthropic leaders. So Bob said in the very beginning, I'll do this chairmanship, but I'm not going to be a fundraiser. And then now $34 million later, I would say he's a pretty good fundraiser. We started having those conversations.
We rebranded him.
That's right. And so the initial conversations were really the idea of giving a joint gift to both facilities. And so the conversation with Procter & Gamble and the Hale Foundation was really based on this overall funding structure. And we kind of decided we should do this by walking through various doors. And the first door was to have a conversation with some of the lead donors that you see on that list. And that was a conversation that was really around splitting a gift 50-50. And then there were also a series of donors that had already come forward that had already restricted their dollars to the music hall effort. And so that was kind of an easy conversation because they had already committed, but then folks like Harry Fath started hearing the bigger solution and wanted to support the overall effort. So we're kind of approaching the conversation with a very donor-centric approach. That is, we know certain folks have very deep histories with one institution and not another institution. And we certainly want to honor that, and we want people to be excited about investing in the project, but we know there's many individuals and companies that have relationship with both, and we would love to entertain kind of a split gift. I think it's a complicated question in terms of how the dollars are split between the public and private, and so much of it is in motion now that really this 40 million is, we believe, kind of the private sector down payment on the overall funding solution.
You know, the other remarkable element to this whole collaboration is the fact that we have organizations who've shared some of their innermost secrets and donors, and that doesn't happen. You know, we pushed people out of their comfort zone to make that happen, and that's a very positive return for us. So if we end up asking you twice, we'll hope that you'll forgive us, knowing this monumental task is upon just a small team of folks.
Well, and I think there was a lot of sensitivity, and I have to give a huge thanks to the leaders of each of the resident organizations and Museum Center around being very open around their own fundraising goals. And one of the things that we were very scared about in this overall conversation is we didn't want to have a huge influx of dollars going for a renovation and then realize everybody had used all of their resources and had nothing for operating and sponsoring and doing all the huge investment that it takes to keep these institutions going forward. So from the very beginning, we've been very transparent among the organizations about which people we are talking to, which companies we're having conversations with, and are there sensitivities around particular asks or projects that individual or company might be involved in. And I think, as Tim says, it's never an exact science. It's just something that we know going into it, and we're trying to do our best to be thoughtful about the investment that many people are making in lots of different ways to these institutions.
So Scott, are you saying that the operating expenses of the building are presumed to be an endowment for each building, and that's included in the total fundraising cost?
So as of right now, all of the numbers that you saw relative to state funding, to the historic tax credits, the 40 million that's recommended for private fundraising, that is all construction cost. So the conversation, and Bob, you might be better at answering this question, but the conversation with the public funding is all about the financing of the buildings. And the one thing that we want to be very clear in the conversations with the commissioners is that we're trying to be realistic about how large that private investment is in only the construction cost, because of all of the needs for operating and endowments and everything else that it takes for these institutions to be successful. There may be an opportunity coming out of the public funding and the overall funding solution, I think, to use the momentum of this overall project to help build endowments for everything that's kind of happening in these buildings. And I think it's still in the works and kind of in the conversation around how this might play out.
When you build like a new plant or a new building, or when you renovate a building like we are here, it's very difficult to separate the electricity you use for the lights in the building versus the electricity that's used for the saws that people use to cut wood in the construction. And so a lot of we at P&G, we would call it pre-operating costs. Before you're actually done with the construction, you have a lot of pre-operating costs that may have otherwise been operating costs of the building, but they're different during the construction phase. So as we put together all the cost elements, we've got to be very, very careful to separate what's operating versus pre-operating and what gets done during that time. And we're doing that because we want to be very clear on where the costs are coming from. Yes, sir.
Yes, to Scott's point, that the funding for these projects is going to the construction costs. However, is there a thought that there would be an ongoing maintenance fund that would be built up to sustain these buildings long past this construction?
Yeah, I was trying to explain that all of the costs won't be going purely to construction. Some of the costs, some of the funding will go to what would have otherwise been operating costs during the time of construction, which for this building would be, let's say, 5 years, 5.5, 5, 6 years. For Music Hall, a lesser period of time. The funding strategy that we're looking at, which is the sales tax, the way the sales tax increase is structured is you generate a lot of funds, and then at the end there are residual funds. Those residual funds, it would be our proposal to take those residual funds and put them in endowment for the two buildings. I don't know, Murray, I know Murray's here. Moo's here somewhere? Moo? You want to talk about why there are residual funds, or is that or Matt? Matt, you want to talk about why there are residual funds?
Hi, I'm Matt Starman, and one of Moo's associates at RSA. I'll try to explain this at a very high level because we can get in the weeds real quick. When you have a sales tax revenue and you want to sell bonds against that revenue stream, bond purchasers don't want the revenue to equal the amount of debt service that has to be paid. So they build in a coverage factor. So a very simple way of thinking about it is, for every dollar of debt service, we will model $1.50 worth of sales tax receipts. It's called a coverage factor, and it creates cushion because revenues fluctuate. So in essence, if everything goes according to plan, there will be some excess revenues that could be used for the purposes.
With the detail that Matt just described, I think you can see why I get a little bit upset if somebody says we haven't been working very hard or thoroughly on this. It's very complex, and a lot of work has gone into this. Other questions, comments? Yes, there's a microphone coming right behind you.
Okay. Assuming a successful outcome to your wonderfully hard work, I'm very concerned about the auditorium at Music Hall. And I'm wondering if you all will simply go with the existing revitalization plans. I'm not talking about the front half of the building, the public spaces, but just Music Hall's central function and
Yes.
the acoustics.
I'm not prepared to talk that today, but I know Steve Leeper has gone to all the resident organizations, and I know you're planning a separate review of the plans moving forward. Scott, when will you do that?
Yeah, the question was concern around what's happening within the auditorium of Music Hall, which is kind of where all the action is, and certainly where the concern, I think, of everyone involved in terms of the renovation. To speak to the follow-up to this meeting, we're hoping to do similar type of invite meetings to learn about the actual renovations and the construction work that will be done, which we hope in the coming 2 to 3 weeks we'll get those on the calendar. I will say, just as a sneak preview, that the auditorium work that was done in any of the older plans that you saw, that the spirit of that is being continued on, and the work of the acousticians that were in that original plan is being built upon. So and acousticians will be part of the process when it would go to design as well. So I think the spirit of the core work done around the auditorium to improve the sound and to pull the symphony stage forward, a lot of those elements are still very much included and kind of central to that plan. But we'll let Steve and the experts talk about that work at the coming meeting.
Thanks, Scott. Ed, we got a mic coming your way. Scott, there's a question over here too.
Obviously, the first question, which I'm sure you're anticipating, is the tax for the stadiums didn't meet the projections. So why are we taking on another sales tax that may not meet projections? So what's the thinking about if it doesn't meet the goal?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we're ready for it. Matt, do you want to answer that, or you want me to? We'll explain to you what went wrong with the stadium tax, the Stadia tax, and then we'll explain to you how we're doing this one differently.
I'll explain the Stadia tax first. When that particular sales tax revenue was implemented and the bonds were structured, the debt service for the paying for the Stadia was essentially relying on a 3% annual compounded growth over what was 25 or 30 years. So if you remember back in the late 90s, when the economy was going gangbusters, logical people may have assumed that was a logical assumption. But when the recession hit first in 01, and we had negative growth, and then again in 07, 08, 09, further negative growth, the problem with the Stadia is that there's no way to recover from those huge negative impacts in the overall economy. And ultimately, a 3% growth rate it's just an aggressive assumption. Our preliminary modeling, we actually, just to kind of put broad numbers on the page, we used the exact opposite. We assumed a negative 2% growth, which frankly is just as irrational as a 3% growth rate, because we compounded it. But for our purposes and what we've presented and what we would intend to present on the 23rd, we're assuming zero growth. And if you look back in Hamilton County over the last 15 years or more, it's a very conservative assumption. So we're very mindful of the Stadia issue and the bad taste that the voters have because of expectations that weren't met, and we've tried to mitigate that with very conservative assumptions.
But Ed, you're right, it's something we're going to have to make sure we communicate in our marketing campaign, because there are a lot of people in Hamilton County who are just going to hear sales tax increase and get worried. As Matt said, we've modeled 0% growth. Last 5 years, 1.3% growth. Last 10 years, 1.4% growth, so it is a conservative assumption. Yes, sir.
Thank you. As I understand it, the Art Museum in Detroit passed a levy that was in multiple counties. Each county had done it separately to support their museum. Had that been thought of to support this regional effort?
We took a look at that. We looked at what would it take to get a multi-county levy passed, and frankly, we just thought it was a bridge too far. We did some work looking at it. There just isn't that sense of cooperation amongst the region. I mean, you would even think that the first place you would go is Northern Kentucky, right? That's difficult. That's difficult. But yes, sir, we did look at it. Yes, please. Scott's bringing you a mic.
Who actually owns Union Terminal? And then when we say the museum center and how many square feet, I mean, that's a huge complex you have in front of us. I mean, who owns what of this whole complex? Thank you.
We've spent a lot of time trying to figure that out. I'm serious. We've gone back and looked at all the historical documents because through the years, as people have kicked this can down the road, it's kind of like a hot potato, and they give different ownership pieces to different parts of government. But on a more specific answer, Doug, do you want to answer that on what the reality is?
So it depends which argument you want to make. Ed Deller's a real estate lawyer, so we'll ask him. If you look at the city plat map, or you look at the land property tax, you'll discover that the building itself here is actually is titled to the city. You'll discover that the front part of the parking lot's actually to the City of Cincinnati Parks Department. That surprised some of you, didn't it? Yes, that's true, because that was Lincoln Park originally, and it was never, that's always been a part of Lincoln Park. But then there's long-term leases to the Union Terminal Association. The Union Terminal Association, and for all of the property, all of it is leased by the city. to the Union Terminal Association. The Union Terminal Association is comprised by Cincinnati Museum Center, Hamilton County, and the city of Cincinnati. There's then a bond indebtedness and bond structure for all the funds that were put into this for the first time in 1990, and then that created all the equity. So all the equity interest in the building for all the improvements are owned by Hamilton County. And then there's a lease agreement between the Museum Center Corporation and the Union Terminal Association for the management on the day-to-day. And then there's an operating agreement between the...
Are you unhappy that you asked now? I mean, thanks, Doug, that was enough. But this is what this task force has had to go through, because, just so you understand, you can't get historic tax credits if a not-for-profit organization owns the structure. Because if it's not-for-profit, there's no profit to take the tax credit against. So we've had to work through all of that. We got to get all the ownership right, and then we got to get all the tax credit forms filed. So it's quite complex. Carol.
Is November when you'd want this on the ballot? November, right?
Yeah.
So then I have a second part to that
Well,
question. Sorry.
since you asked that, let me just say that November is when we want it on the ballot, and I think there will be an effort to say, and we've already heard this from one commissioner who voted against the idea of even discussing this, is the group hasn't done thorough enough work. They haven't been working on it long enough. We don't have enough time. We can't rush to judgment, so let's wait till May, which is the other time. That would be a disaster. Why would that be a disaster? Because everything's been planned against November, particularly in the case of Music Hall, and the thing will continue to deteriorate. And in the past, delay has been used as one of the reasons to keep kicking the can. Because once we get to May, guess what? Then we'll talk about the next November. Once we get to that November, we'll talk about the next May. And the $34 million that of private funding that we've gotten will dry up, will go away, because people won't have confidence in this effort anymore. Sorry, go ahead.
The second part of the question was, I think early on you said there was a focus group and the results were 60% of the people said they were in support of preserving the buildings. Do you think
Actually,
that's-
it was CBC research, Cincinnati Business Committee research, that was done, 2 years ago? I think it was 2.5 years ago. That was about 60%.
I think that answered my question, because my question was going to be, do you think that's translatable into how people would vote on this?
Today.
Yeah.
That was a big piece of research, so that was in our P&G terminology, that was a representative sample. That was hundreds, thousands of people. What the focus group we did said that research is still applicable today, but it's a focus group. So we're in the process right now working with the CRBC and the CBC to refield that research, which is going in the field right now. Any other questions or comments?
Thank you.
Be over in a second.
I'm just curious, what would happen if in November, it was voted down? Is there any backup plan for that?
I'm glad you asked that, because my point of view all along from the very beginning was, if we don't have the best plan, tell me what your plan is. Give me every meeting I've had with the county commissioners, I've said, my expectation is we vote for politicians to lead. If you don't like our plan, these people who have helped, what's your plan? We've even looked at what the cost would be to tear down this building. If you would like a tour of this building sometime, we can arrange that, or Music Hall. This building is all structural steel. It was built by railroad engineers. It looks like a trestle bridge. You would have to have people climb up on this building with torches to cut the steel apart. You're not going to take a wrecking ball to this building. So it'd be very expensive to tear down. But then the people say to me, but we don't want to tear it down. Okay, well, what's the plan? What's the plan? I don't have a backup plan. I'm giving you the best plan we have. That's what we're going to give to the county commissioners. And if they have a better plan, we would love to hear it. We've done a lot of brainstorming. We've looked at a lot of alternatives. We have what we think is the best, lowest cost plan. There was a question over here.
Supposing at the public meetings, public hearings, there's obviously more support for one building than others. Then what? Is it both or none?
Our research suggests that there'll be roughly equal support. There'll be a broader base of support for Museum Center from families, but there'll be a very passionate support from a smaller group of people for Music Hall. And what we need to do is use both of those together in order to get this across. I don't think there'll be any attempt to separate the two, but I think that might be another delay strategy by the opposition. So what we've got to do is make sure we don't come apart. This won't get done if they get separated, because we need the broad base of support for Music Hall, and we need the passionate support Music Hall has for Museum Center. And that's why we put the two together. Yes, please.
Thank you for all the work you've been doing. It's very exciting. And
Thank you,
also,
Diane.
I understand the dilemma of trying to keep this under wrap until June 23rd. So you've asked us to come today, you've asked us to stay quiet, and you've asked us to show up June 23rd. Those things are doable, but we need to do so much more than that to get the constituencies, the electorate out
Yes.
to this big meeting. So I'm asking you and then the other leaders of the organizations represented here, what can we do to help beyond these three things that
Right.
you just asked? And I'd also like to say, I don't think we can leave this to chance. We've got to get this organized. There needs to be a groundswell of people at that meeting. The commissioners need to be reminded that they're elected officials and that the leaders of this community are behind this.
Yes.
So can we look to you and to the executives of these of all the organizations here to help us get organized for this?
Yes. I wasn't very clear. While I want you to treat the information I've given you with confidentiality, I'm talking about like the numbers. How much would it cost to replace Museum Center in the parking lot? I just don't want the numbers out there. I do want you to leave this room and go talk to your friends about what's gone on with this task force for the last 7 months, about what's coming up, and about what needs to be done. And we will help organize people in that regard. Mabe, do you want to talk about the work that you're doing?
Alrighty, so we have a group of people, including both organizations, as well as we have hired a political campaign person to help us, and we're about to also hire a project coordinator on top of landlords. So we're a big group of people working on what happens after this gets out, meaning hopefully next week we'll get the green light that we can start the actual campaign. And the campaign is called Save Our Icons, which is what you saw here and what Bob said. And what we need your help on is that from now until November, we have been able to identify at least 500 events where we want to be present. That means volunteers with the t-shirts, with a booth, explaining, and really a grassroots effort that gets everybody excited and most importantly, going to vote, because we know that that's an issue of getting people out of their couches and going to vote. So it's not only saying yes, but acting upon it. So what we need is volunteers and people who want to work with us. So get the word out there and tell us if you have people or organizations that could join the cause and help us.
But the Landor campaign will have a lot of tactical elements to it to deploy some of these troops on the ground. The group that put together the volunteer backbone for the choir games has been engaged.
I'm sorry, Tim. The other request, go into our Save Our Icons a Facebook page right now and become a follower. Ask your friends to do the same. We're also working on a website that will be posted very soon. So you can also go there, look at the events, and again, really spread the word. This is a real grassroots effort. We will also have radio. We look forward to having TV ads. I mean, there's a lot of things that will start happening. But I think social media is one that could really go out there really fast, and you can be a huge advocate.
I would just add that from a confidentiality standpoint, we're really just talking about between now and Monday the 23rd. At 11 a.m. on Monday the 23rd, all of this information will be public, and then it can just be swirled and pushed out further and further. We have a window of time during the month of July that the commissioners need to hear loudly that the public wants to vote, that it is not simply left up to the commissioners to push this aside, but that the public should have a voice as to whether this goes on the ballot or not. So that's the first step. And then after we get past that and we know we're on the ballot, then it's off to the races with all sorts of great tactics that we will want everyone to participate in.
Other questions, comments? Tim, did you have something else, Tim, you wanted to add? Okay, great. Well, I would like to thank everybody for coming today. If there's any more information you'd like, or if you'd like to take a tour of either building, please let us know. We'd be happy to arrange that. And I want to thank you for everything that you've done for the respective boards that you're on. And hopefully, I'm quite confident that we're going to be able to get this thing done, but we're going to need everybody's help and support. So thank you very much.